month-long e-Symposium series on Gandhian thoughts and philosophy in celebration of the Mahatma's 150th birth centenary, an initiative of the Ministry of Education, Government of India. Today is our third event. We have speakers from 3 institutes spread over 3 continents. Professor Anindita Ghosh from the UK, Professor Ritu Khandari from the University of Texas, Arlington, USA, and Professor Shagoto Chatterjee from our own IIT Kharagpur. With me in the studio, we have the Dean of Alumni Affairs, Professor Subrata Chattopadhyay, the Associate Dean of International Relations, Professor Ananduru Bhattacharya, and the Associate Dean of Alumni Affairs, Professor Shurjo Pal, along with the Senior Executive Officer, Mr. Anirban Biswas. We also have with us our Director, Professor V.K. Tiwari, and our Deputy Director, Professor S.K. Bhattacharya. I welcome you again, and I request our Director, Professor Tiwari, to give his opening remarks.
Good afternoon to all of you. In fact, about a month back, we got an information and then directive from the MHRD that in the 150th year celebration of our Mahatma, we have to conduct e-seminars. And we are very fortunate that our faculty, smart faculty colleagues in the Dean's office, they took up this challenge and they have connected several faculties and speakers from various different countries in the world. In this line, this is the third one, as Professor Baduriya said. This is the third in the line. And we have got today one professor from Professor Anindita Ghosh from UK, Professor Ritu Khanduri from Texas, USA. Well, we are very happy that you are here to speak on the Mahatma. Well, our father of the nation, whom we call, and our children will call him Bapu. He has, in fact, I say that he is not a human being only, he is a phenomenon. And in fact, the philosophy and the ideas which he gave long back, in fact, they are very much just today. In fact, they are very much befitting today. Particularly the discipline which he taught, and he taught to everyone. In fact, the one which he taught in his ashram, the discipline of time. And I'm sure everybody will admit that the time management is one of the best things to be done in this world. If you have managed your time well, you can manage everything in the world. Your money, your health, or your wealth as well. And that is why he has told us first thing. And if we continue even that in the pandemic situation which has taken us for last 6-8 months, I think we can maintain. We have to maintain our health, and for that, in fact, we have to discipline ourselves. We have to do yoga. We have to do remain disciplined. We have to eat in time. We have to take things which are good for our health, and so on and so forth. In fact, the philosophy which he gave of Teen Bandar, we must know that he has talked of that Bura sunenge nahi, Bura dekhenge nahi, or Bura kahenge nahi. And in fact, in these 3 Bandars, 3 monkeys of Mahatma, he has spread the news which is universal and it is eternal. I think he has also talked of beyond his, in fact, purview of thinking is that Swavalamban and Sarvodaya. He thought of people who were downtrodden. He always thought that everybody is Hari's Jan. That means God's people. We are all people of God, and hence everybody should be unique. Everybody should be looked after well. Those who are needing help, we must help them. And he gave a concept that everybody, if you are strong, you are good, and you are best only when you stand on your own feet. He has talked of Swavalamban, he has talked of Atmanirbhar. And I think this is very much today evident to all of us. In this series of talks, I think I'm very happy that this particular symposium is inaugurated today. I'm happy to inaugurate this. I welcome both the experts, and third expert also is from our institute, Swagata Chatterjee, I welcome him as well. With me, our Deputy Director, Professor Siman Bhattacharjee is there, Professor Chanda Chakravarti, who has kindly agreed to mentor and to take care of this program very well. I know her for a long time, and I am very happy that she agreed for this particular request. We have Professor Baiduria Bhattacharya, our Dean, and Professor Anandarup Bhattacharya, our Associate Dean, and other people who are managing this show. I think we welcome you. With this, I inaugurate and say that let us welcome our guest. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Tiwari. I now request Professor Chanda Chakraborty to take over the session. We have 3 speakers and about 25 minutes per speaker. So for the next 75 minutes or so, Professor Chanda Chakraborty will conduct this event. Over.
A very hearty and warm welcome to everybody, the speakers, the dignitaries, and those who have joined in to listen to this session. You heard that this is the 3rd event in the International e-Symposia on Gandhian thoughts and philosophy, organized by Indian Institute of Technology, Kharagpur, as an initiative from Ministry of Education, Government of India. So we have today with us 3 speakers. Each of them will approach Gandhian thoughts and philosophy from their own areas of expertise. And as for the format of the session, we thought that the speeches, each of the speeches will be followed by a short question and answer session by the moderator, which is me. I have the honor to be the moderator of this session this evening. At the end, we'll try to have a discussion session, provided we have the time. I request each speaker to remember the time constraint. Actually, the speech, if it could be finished within 15 to 20 minutes, then we can have some time left for the quick question answer after that. Great. So we'll start this. Our very first speaker today is Professor Anindita Ghosh. I have the privilege to introduce our first speaker. Professor Ghosh is Professor of Modern Indian History at the University of Manchester. She is a Fellow of the Royal Historical Society, her doctoral degrees from Cambridge University. She joined University of Manchester as a lecturer in 2001 and has been teaching there since. Her work broadly addresses questions of power, culture, and resistance. She has several monographs to her credit. I'm going to mention a few. The most recent is the 2016 publication, Claiming the City, Protest, Crime and Scandals in Colonial Calcutta, 1860 to 1920. It's an Oxford University Press publication. Another of her work is Power in Print, Popular Publishing, and the Politics of Language and Culture in a Colonial Society, 1778 to 1905. It's a 2006 publication. Apart from that, she also has an edited volume, Behind the Veil, Resistance, Women, and the Everyday in Colonial South Asia, 2007. Other than that, she has published widely on social history of popular vernacular cultures, print, street and folk music, and colonial Calcutta. Her most recent research is on nationalist Indian revolutionaries. She is the incoming chair of the British Association for South Asian Studies in UK from November 2020 onwards. Recently, a few months back in Manchester, a public statue of Mahatma Gandhi was installed. And in relation to that, and also in relation to the appearance of Gandhiji's image on a commemorative British currency coin, Professor Ghosh has appeared on BBC Radio and TV. So without further ado, let me bring to you Professor Ghosh. The title of her talk today is Gandhian Legacies in the world today. Professor Ghosh, over to you.
Thank you very, very much, Professor Chakraborty. It's my absolute privilege to be part of this e-Symposium today. So thank you to Kharagpur IIT for inviting me to present on this occasion of the 150th anniversary of the birth of Mahatma Gandhi. But to begin with, I must say that I feel a bit of a fraud talking here because my research is not specifically on Gandhi, although I have been teaching Gandhi to my students for a long time, and as a historian of modern Indian history, you cannot escape Gandhi. So he's very much part and parcel of everything that one does. So I decided, therefore, to keep my talk very general, talking particularly, and given my situation here in the UK, and as you mentioned, Chanda, being a kind of live participant of these ongoing debates about Gandhi in this country, I thought it would be fitting to talk about the legacy of Gandhi in the world today, because his work and his oeuvre in the context of India is so very well known. But I thought I would be able to say something different here by talking about his worldwide legacy. So before I start, I will start to share my PowerPoint because I will be dependent on that as I speak. And hopefully this is going to go all right. So can you see that? Has this come up?
Yes, it's visible.
Yes, it is visible.
Visible.
Okay, fantastic. So I'm going to go on the slideshow now. Right. So to begin with, I wanted to introduce the various themes for today's discussion that I have. I will talk generally about Gandhian legacies in the world today, and also why it is so relevant. And so briefly, even though I think this has been repeated ad nauseum, what he stands for and what his philosophy is, but just briefly to connect with what I am saying today, I think I need to talk about nonviolence and his fight for justice. I will then go on to talk again very briefly about the civil rights movement in the US and how Gandhi was so much central to that fight, and then bring this in line with more recent debates about Gandhi, particularly here in the UK. So I'll keep that there as I speak. So Gandhi and his idea of truth force or satyagraha, when he introduced this idea to the world, he explained it with characteristic modesty as an idea that was as old as the hills, going back to ancient religions, anti-industrial naturalism, movements like those of the suffragists and other thinkers like Tolstoy, Thoreau, and Emerson, and Gandhi has always, as we know, been, just so modest about his ideas. But we must remember that it was Gandhi alone at the start of the last century who proved beyond doubt that nonviolence employed on a large scale could change society for common good with minimum loss of life and property. And that was his biggest contributions. Even though the ideas had been around, he was the one who actually mobilized it on that scale. By the 1970s, 3 decades after Gandhi's death, there was not a country in Europe that did not have some sort of nonviolent movement, especially, though not exclusively, in progressive activist fields like feminism, gay rights, anti-war, and environmentalism. And even if hailed as a miracle and a saint when he first made his appearance on the global stage, the truth of nonviolence has continued to appeal and even made its transition into the present century with the Black Lives Matter movement. And not many thinkers can boast of that level of enduring legacy. Those like Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela gave nonviolence the character and publicity of a mass movement and exposed the close links between social injustice and militarism. The lessons learned from the civil rights movement in turn fed into the peaceful campaign against the Vietnam War, resulting in the as yet largest nonviolent protests in US history. In Latin America, there emerged 2 Nobel Peace Prize laureates for their enduring work in the context of nonviolent protests for ensuring human rights and a nuclear-free continent. Gandhi's earliest experiments with nonviolence was, of course, in South Africa, where he helped found the African National Congress, and the idea had great support from African leaders in other countries, such as Kenneth Kaunda of Zambia and Julius Nyerere of Tanzania. The founding of the UN University of Peace in Costa Rica in 1978 owed much to the Gandhian orientation of its proposer, President Karaza. Now, I would like to draw your attention to the slide I have here in front of you. And I'm sure our other speaker who specializes on cartoons is very much familiar with this, as would be some other members of the audience. But this is a cartoon that appeared in the Chicago Sun-Times in 1968 following the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. And you have, of course, the figure of a seated Gandhi talking to King, and he says, the odd thing about assassins, Dr. King, is that they think they've killed you. The idea, of course, here is that even if the person is killed, the idea stays on. And that is the truth of the Gandhian philosophy. So what makes this legacy so enduring? Why is Gandhi such an important figure, such a monumental figure of the 20th century? For that, we briefly have to turn to, again, even though this is very well known, and I'm sure every member of the audience listening in today would be more or less familiar with these ideas. But just to briefly run through, one is Satyagraha, which is the truth force or soul force, meeting brute force. The other is Swaraj, which was not just political freedom for Gandhi, but freedom from Western capitalism and cultural domination, and non-violence, of course, that lent moral authority to his just struggles. In his own words, and here he's arguing about Satyagraha, he said it was a method of securing rights by personal suffering. And he says it was the reverse of resistance by arms. And I quote from him, and it's beautiful, it's lucid, and this is just characteristic Gandhi for us. His message was so simple, even though it was the idea itself was very complex and very deep. But his message is so simple to understand. And I quote, "When I refuse to do a thing that is repugnant to my conscience, I use soul force. For instance, the government of the day has passed a law which is applicable to me. I do not like it. If by using violence I force the government to repeal the law, I am employing what may be termed body force. If I do not obey the law and accept the penalty for its breach, I use soul force. It involves sacrifice of self." Unquote. And this could not have been, I'm sure you will agree, be put more eloquently. I now take you to a very different event which happened in 1919, and again, I'm sure many viewers, you are familiar with this terrible atrocity that happened under British rule in India in 1919. Now, 2019, last year, marked the 100th anniversary of the infamous Jallianwala Bagh massacre in the Punjab, where a peaceful protest meeting was fired upon by General Dyer without any provocation. According to official figures, 379 people were killed and over 1,200 wounded. Indian estimates, of course, were much higher. Manchester Museum here in my city on that occasion put up an outstanding exhibition on the event that laid bare the atrocities of colonialism to younger generations of British children and general members of the public in this country. And I pick up on the Jallianwala Bagh massacre because it was a turning point for Gandhi. Even though he had experimented in South Africa, he was in a stage, even in 1990, he was at a stage where his path had not been, set so firmly. But 1919 proves a turning point for Gandhi. And following the massacre, he writes a letter to Lord Chelmsford, who is the then Viceroy of India. And in that letter, he thunders, and this is what he writes. So for him, the outrage did not just, which is what you have on the slide, that's an extract from the letter. But for Gandhi, the outrage did not just expose the monstrosity of British rule in India, it also it made Gandhi. And in a thundering letter that he wrote subsequently to the then Viceroy of India that you have there, Gandhi outlined his condemnation of the event in no uncertain terms. What the act also did was to undermine the moral authority and therefore the legitimacy of British rule in India. And this is a turning point of Gandhi for that reason. So what Satyagraha does for him, what Truth Force does for him, is really to undermine the moral authority of the rule that is British rule in India. And as he said, I quote, "We do not want to punish Tyre. There is no desire for revenge. We want to change the system that produced Tyre." And that is what it was all about. He wasn't looking at individuals. He was not attacking one aspect of British rule. He was not picking up his cudgels against any one administrator, but he was fighting against a system that was unjust and that was unfair, and that ruled by brute force. And it is this universalism in the Gandhian philosophy that makes it such an irresistible template in fights for social justice and social change. And that is what makes Gandhi so enduring. So it wasn't just a template that could work for India, not for the rest of the world. It could work across civilizations and countries and times. And this takes us nicely to the third theme that I wanted to talk about, which is about the civil rights movement in the US. Now, we know generally, is the pace all right, or am I going too fast? Okay.
I think you're going just fine. Just fine.
Thank you. So this is really the heart of what I was wanting to talk about today. So the civil rights movement in the US and the role of Martin Luther King Jr. in it is something that we know about. It's tremendous legacy that Gandhi leaves for the civil rights movement in America. But the specifics of this legacy and the significance of it for Martin Luther King Jr. is less well known and has been recently outlined by Jake Hodder in a Journal of American Studies article, which was published last year. I have the slide there with the two quotes that I'm going to refer to here, but the article is actually called Casting a Black Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., American Pacifists and the Global Dynamics of Race. And this was published in the Journal of American Studies 2019, pages 1 to 27. Now, casting King in the role of Black Gandhi, Hodder says, was a key element in enabling his transformation from a young, dynamic leader of a community boycott of local bus services into a global champion, and that's the quote there, into a global champion of racial justice, pulling together Montgomery with waves of anti-colonialism from Johannesburg to Accra and Delhi. And what he's trying to say here is that, Martin Luther King Jr. couldn't have been Martin Luther King Jr. unless he had hooked into the principles of Gandhian resistance. He would have just remained that lone activist in Montgomery. So he needed the Gandhian philosophy to connect with the rest of the world. And we'll see soon how powerfully he is able to do that, especially as there's a wave of anti-colonial protests running across Africa around this time. So the Gandhian philosophy was much more than just non-violent resistance for Martin Luther King Jr. It was the hook with which he connected to the rest of the world. And you can see the similarities. So I'm doing a bit of a reverse movement here. You can see the similarities in their philosophies with the two quote blocks that I have on the slide there, where Gandhi is saying something like, inaction at a time of conflagration is inexcusable. And he says, we're not going to Washington, this is Martin Luther King Jr. saying, we're not going to Washington to beg but to demand what is ours. This is what King is saying in 1968. So, there's this idea that only we can change our lives, and, we are the ones who will have to act. We have to be, activists if we want to get what we actually want. That idea, you can see, here connecting across these two figures, these two, great leaders. Again, Gandhi says, be the change you want to see. And similarly, you have Martin Luther King Jr. saying, blacks must assume the primary responsibility for making the changes that would improve their status. So you can see how close and almost overlapping those ideas are.
Professor Ghosh, I have the unpleasant duty to remind you about the time.
Okay, how much time do I have? Because I started at 2:10, so probably 15 minutes.
So it's already about 15 minutes, so if you can, in the next 5 minutes, you can wrap it up. I'm sorry.
Okay, no, that's absolutely fine. I'll do my best. So basically, what I was trying to say here is that the Gandhian idea was not just specific to the US, but it was very much part of the African liberation movement, and we find that in being the Black Gandhi was tying in with other emerging post-colonial movements taking places across the continent of Africa, in Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, Zambia, Tanzania, and South Africa. And it was more than anything else King's month-long visit to India in 1959, which cemented his growing reputation as one of Gandhi's most promising disciples. As King himself noted, to other countries I may go as a tourist, but to India I come as a pilgrim. I want to then quickly run to the relevance of Gandhi in today's world, even though it seems quite a big jump. But then this is in the context of the Black Lives Matter movement, which is raging across the world as we speak. And we have this really startling image that you see on the screen of this Black Lives Matter activist carrying a counter-protester on his shoulders who had been injured in those clashes. And someone had clicked this amazing, this vivid, this spectacular picture. And he was overnight he became a celebrity. But this man, and his name, it turns out, is Patrick Hutchinson, he stands for what Gandhi stood for. So no matter this is your enemy, no matter this is someone who's come there to block your rightful protest, he said, this is someone who was injured, and I just have to rescue him. And he says, all I want, he's not my enemy, it's the system that I'm fighting against, similar to what Gandhi was saying earlier on to Lord Amherst. And he says, I just want equality. And if this is an injured man, I will look after him. That does not mean that he becomes my enemy. I don't have time for this, but I'm happy to discuss this during the Q&A. But this is a statue of Gandhi that was put up in Manchester, outside that's Manchester Cathedral that we have behind the statue. This was put up in November 2019. And there was a lot of protest in Manchester. There were similar protests elsewhere recently, in Leicester in particular, against the similar erection of similar statues of Gandhi in that city. And the bizarre thing is that the reason behind that was that people, in the light of most recent political developments, including Black Lives Matter, but not just that, but also a book that has recently been written by Desai and Golem called The South African Gandhi, Stretcher Bearer of Empire, published by Stanford University Press in 2015, where Gandhi is accused of racism. Gandhi is accused of being a racist. And it became a debate taken totally out of context, so much so that, of course, as you can imagine, with every protest, there's a counter-protest. So there were people speaking in defense of the putting up of Gandhi's statue. but it became embroiled in all kinds of really skewed discussions around race and what Gandhi stood for while he was in South Africa. But if I can just finish with my concluding remarks on that. Gandhi was no superhuman, and he was as fallible as anyone else. But to call Gandhi a racist seems bizarre and surreal, and is actually indicative of other kinds of tensions, such as a realignment of geopolitics, where the disproportionate rise of India and China has sundered those historic ties that we once had with Africa. Those ties are no longer there. Also responsible is the rise of African nationalism and concomitant waves of anti-immigrant feelings directed against Indians in the continent. And by the mid-1960s, actually, the name Gandhi, once practically a shorthand for anti-colonial Pan-Africanism, became increasingly unpopular as the political mood shifted across the continent, and Gandhi became a story of the rapidly diminishing currency that he offered on the world stage. So that is the context in which we have to understand these debates. Debates are always good, and as I said, no one is a saint. But then, to call him a racist is really like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You're completely disregarding what the man stood for all his life. I'd like to end there. So thank you very much for your patience and for listening.
Thank you very much, Professor Ghosh, for this excellent and erudite talk. I'm sure it has enlightened many of us. Particularly, I liked what you said about, the legacy is actually handing over not just some local movements, but some templates with values, with templates, with some actionable philosophy that can be applied anywhere in the world. And that is where the legacy lies. Time is never sufficient to talk about Gandhiji's legacies and the enduring value of his thoughts. But I'll have a quick question and then we go to the next speaker. I know, Professor Ghosh, that you have worked with power relations. Resistance is one kind of answer to equalize the power relations. But in our world today, it's not just racism, but power relations also work in gender, and also there is rural and urban divide, which is not seen as a power divide, but it is. If you take the case of India, then we still are grappling with this issue of the gap between the rural and urban India. So do you think Gandhiji's legacy can be effectively used here? We have worked with many of Gandhian ideals for the rural development, but can you connect the Gandhian legacy directly to addressing this? The villages, Indian villages, was always in the heart of Gandhiji. He talked about Gram Swaraj and starting with the villages. So we know that, but still, after 73 years, this gap still exists. Could you speak a little bit about that? How to make Gandhian philosophy more relevant for the development of everybody? Sarvodaya.
Thank you very much on a very difficult question to answer, but a very important one. And so yes, you're absolutely right. So from over time, there have been various experiments with the Gandhian idea, Sarvodaya, for example. And they have been in various measures and pockets successful, over periods of time in certain areas, in certain sectors, but never to the extent as perhaps Gandhiji himself would have liked. And as with all of his ideas, even non-violence itself, they are very, very difficult ideas. They're just so difficult to control, so difficult to implement, and so difficult to get people to come over to your side. I mean, so much so non-violence, for instance, at the height of the non-cooperation movement in Chauri Chaura, I think if you would remember, or at least some of us would remember, he called off the non-cooperation movement because there were 11 policemen burnt, or was it 22, can't remember, but a significant number of policemen who were burnt alive at the police station of Chauri Chaura. And he called it off instantly like that because it doesn't stand for his values. So, but Gandhi himself had the conviction to do that. So you needed him to be in steer, to be able to have that level of command. Now, now this is not to say that therefore with the man gone, the legacy disappears. But I think there would be other ways in which it's already relevant. I mean, environmentalism, for instance, there are these huge protests against capitalism and against industrial societies in the world today. Making a green earth and maintaining a green earth has become a green planet has become everyone's objective. So I think there has to be. It's a difficult one. I mean, India is a nation that is yet to develop. So we haven't reached a full potential as the industrialized nations in the West. So to say that we can take a step back from industrial capitalism and invest in ideas of Gandhi is one thing, and then to say, well, then to look at your resources and think, well, we haven't yet fully utilized what we have. But I'm sure there can be a happy marriage between those two objectives. Particularly, I think younger generations are turning more and more green, and for them, the Gandhian ideas would have a great degree of appeal.
Yeah, that's a wonderful note of optimism. And with that, I think we have to close this discussion. To go on to the next speaker, thank you very much, Professor Ghosh, once more. So I'm happy and privileged to introduce to you our next speaker, who is Dr. Ritu Kairola Khanduri. She is an associate professor of anthropology in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology in University of Texas at Arlington, USA. She has a long-standing interest in the visual culture around Gandhi, which is the focus of her current book project. She is also the author of Caricaturing Culture in India, Cartoons and History in the Modern World. It's a publication from Cambridge University Press in 2014. She is also the 2020-2021 Fulbright Fellow to India. So I leave it to you, Professor Khanduri, to start your talk, and kindly look at the time. We all have to work with the time constraint. So please. The title of the talk is Branding Gandhiji.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chakravarti, and to IIT Kharagpur for inviting me to this e-seminar. I'm going to jump straight into my paper so that I can economize on the time, and I will begin by sharing my content here. Is that visible?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
All right, good. Thank you. Branding Gandhi. I have organized this presentation today in three parts to take us to three different contexts or moments in which the pictorial representation of Gandhi contributes to his mythologizing. Towards the end of the paper, I am going to pose a set of questions that have animated not just contemporary controversies around Gandhi's representation as a brand or in a painting or any other visual form. These questions also animate the way that we read history or how we analyze and use certain archival sources as sources for writing history or knowing about the past. And I'll elaborate on that as I come to an example to illustrate these very dimensions. So branding Gandhi. In 1971, Dr. Ved Mehta traveled to India, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Japan, England, and Austria to write a biography of Gandhi that would convey the subtler and more lasting, those are his words, shapes that Gandhi had assumed. Mehta's meetings with Gandhi's friends and followers and collecting oral narratives resulted in the acclaimed book Mahatma Gandhi and His Apostles. For Mehta, the Gandhi memorials evoked a magical land, far away. The Gandhi, and here I quote him, the Gandhi Darshan or exhibition is next to the Gandhi Samadhi. It was opened in 1969 to celebrate the centenary of his birth and has become another permanent memorial. The exhibition, which is spread over 40 acres and is housed in several red brick and dark wood pavilions, is somewhat reminiscent of Disneyland. Quote close. Seeking to demythologize Gandhi, Mehta narrated an encounter with a resident in the ashram in Varda. And here, Mehta is telling us about conversations he's had during his tour of the country, of all these Gandhi sites. So here I quote him again. As I leave the ashram, a woman resident stares at me through the window of one of the huts. She leans toward me and shouts, "The next thing you know, there'll be a Gandhi cigarette. It's about the only thing left that hasn't been used to commemorate him." She spits out an orange seed. Quote closed. The ashram's resident's prediction cued Mehta to the actuality of her observation. Indeed, Mahatma cigarettes did exist in the 1940s. Gandhi's statement about a cigarette label named after him was very clear. And here I quote Gandhi when he learns about this particular branding of a cigarette. Of all the abuses to which my name has been put, I know nothing so humiliating to me as the deliberate association of my name with cigarettes. A friend has sent me a label purporting to bear my portrait. The cigarettes are called Mahatma Gandhi cigarettes. Now I have a horror of smoking, as I have of wines. Smoking I consider to be a vice. It deadens one's conscience and is often worse than drink, and in that it acts imperceptibly. It is a habit which is difficult to get rid of when once it seizes hold of a person. It is an expensive vice. It fouls the breath, discolors the teeth, and sometimes even causes cancer. It is an unclean habit. No man has received my permission to associate my name with cigarettes. I should feel thankful if the unknown firm were to withdraw the labels from the market, or if the public would refuse to buy packets bearing such labels. Gandhi commemorating and trademarking was common during Gandhi's time. As we can see here in this slide, Nargis is the brand, is the brand ambassador for Lux, and you have Mahatma Gandhi, who is his image is used to brand one of the incense sticks or agarbattis. So these commemorations and brandings they were common even during Gandhi's times. These did not necessarily have Gandhi's endorsement. In fact, Gandhi distinguished between truthful and untruthful advertisements. He was critical of advertisements that mimicked newspaper reports. Such advertisement that posed, within quotes, as if it were a report from the paper's own correspondent, quote close, were untruthful to Gandhi. So Gandhi, even in other contexts where he has been pictured, archives show us that he is observing the way that he is being represented. So he is watching his own image being used for various kinds of purposes, including political cartoons and for these various kinds of bands. So Gandhi was a witness to his own mythologizing. Political cartoons, bazaar prints, calendars were all integral to way politics was pictorially sensed and understood, both in the past as well as in the present, in our time today. In the second part, which I'm now turning to, let's take a... Pardon me?
Can you please put the PPT in full screen?
It is on the screen.
I'm saying in the presentation mode. In the YouTube, this thing, it is not being seen. So if you can put it in the presentation mode, that will be great.
Is that better?
Yes, it's much better. Thank you.
All right, welcome. In those days, Gandhi's images also abounded. I moved on to the second part of my presentation now. In those days, Gandhi images also abounded as bazaar prints, calendars, and photographs for display in homes and shops. But affection for such pictures was met by the colonial police with penalty and punishment. We know this, for example, from eyewitness accounts and interviews recorded by a team of investigators traveling the length and breadth of the country in 1932 to study the condition of India. The investigators reported, I quote, photographs of Indian leaders, not only in shops but in private houses, were pulled down and taken away by the police. The parties concerned were assaulted or threatened. According to their report, in the early part of 1932, this form of police action was widely prevalent in Madras, Gujarat, and other areas. The informants included non-congressmen. So the colonial police was targeting anyone and everyone who was using these images either in their shops or in their homes in a private capacity. The investigators continue. We made inquiries of a large number of shopkeepers, including the Sri Krishna Paper and Stationery Depot, Surat, and also at Randir, about this ban on photographs and souvenirs. We were informed that the police authorities had advised stationers that if they wished to show that they were not Congress and were loyal to the government, they should withdraw all calendars bearing Mr. Gandhi's picture or that of other leaders. Otherwise, they would share the fate of tobacconist Nagin Das. The latter gentleman had refused to move Mr. Gandhi's photograph from his shop and had been sentenced under the ordinances to 2 years rigorous imprisonment and a fine. Clearly, Gandhi's pictures were trouble. But have they become more troubling today? I move on to the third part of my paper today. In this third part, I turn to the example of Apple and Mont Blanc. What you see here in this slide are the bazaar prints and calendar prints that I referenced just a bit earlier. That were quite popular at that time, and also mythologized Gandhi and re-scripted what the story of the national politics of that time were. And these two posters in particular represent a very interesting retelling of Gandhi and Bhagat Singh's relationship and their political ideologies. And we can take this up in a discussion if needed. In the Apple ad campaign, Gandhi, along with several global icons, to use the author Salman Rushdie's words, modeled for Apple. Rushdie wrote that Gandhi was seen to be on message with corporate philosophy. But for Steve Jobs, who was instrumental in rebranding Apple, marketing was about values. I quote, "This is a very complicated world. It's a very noisy world. We are not going to get a chance to get people to remember much about us. No company is. Apple is fortunately one of half a dozen best brands in the world. It is one of the greats of the greats. But even a great brand needs investment and caring. Apple at the core, its core value, we believe that people with passion can change the world for the better. Core values shouldn't change. Some of them are living, some are not. That is in reference to the icons that they chose for their brand campaign. But the ones that aren't, as you will see, you know that if they ever used a computer, it would have been a Mac. And this includes Gandhi. So if he was around when Apple was available, then he would have used a Mac. The celebrity images in this campaign were all used with the permission of their respective estates and family members, living family members. This campaign received many accolades, and its ads have become collector items with a cult following. The Apple ads were broadcasted as billboards, in magazines, and as posters that were sent to schools, and as a video. More than a decade later, a similar campaign that included Gandhi along with other luminaries, Mont Blanc's limited edition pens, met with protests and was ultimately withdrawn from India. A little bit about this pen and what it intended to symbolize. A week before Gandhi's 140th birth anniversary in September 2009, the luxury pen maker Mont Blanc issued a special edition Gandhi pen. The pens, limited to 3,000 fountain pens and roller balls, were made of 925 sterling silver with fine textile structure on the lacquered cap and barrel, a mandarin garnet above the clip ring, approximately 0.11 carat, a handcrafted rhodium-plated 18-karat gold nib, and ivory-colored Mont Blanc completed the package. Priced at $27,000, the pen, according to Mont Blanc's website, commemorated Gandhi's ideals in politics. Explaining the pen's design, the company brochure noted, Mahatma Gandhi was a major political and spiritual leader of India and the Indian independence movement. The design pays tribute to his life and achievements. The top of the cap and cone are inspired by the spindle which Gandhi used to spin cotton, one of the symbols of Indian independence. The color white is a reference to truth and peace, while the mandarin garnet represents the orange color that is part of the Indian flag. The nib shows an image of Mahatma Gandhi walking with a stick. In addition, The limitation of the Mahatma Gandhi limited edition 3000 is symbolic for the masses of people who followed him during his fight for independence. Tushar Gandhi, Gandhi's grandson, endorsed the pen at its launch. However, not everyone agreed with Montblanc or with Tushar Gandhi. And I quote one of the comments among many that were available and circulating publicly on social media. I quote here, "Oh, this is nothing. We should wait for them to come out with the Gandhi action figure with removable lathi. Dandi Yatra collector's edition set replete with the action figures of Gandhiji's followers and salt. Charkha add-on pack with 3 different size charkhas and the life-size model of Gandhiji's assassination with Nathuram Godse, his revolver and escape vehicle. It's a shame that Mont Blanc brought out this pen in a year when most of the country has been hit by drought and Congress is allegedly on an austerity trip." This is from one of the very disappointed and distraught commentators on social media. So how do we understand all this? The different ways in which Gandhi's image has been received, whether by the colonial state, by the people during the colonial years, and later with the Think Apple campaign and with Mont Blanc. The anthropologist Orwell Lofgren bridges the connection between culture and economy and contends that culturalization processes included attempts to give tangible and concrete forms or manifestations to elusive qualities, and also to find new ways of thinking the unthinkable, reaching the unreachable, and selling the unsaleable, quotes close. Contemporary cultural analyst Gandhi himself and his followers noted the contradiction between Gandhi brand commodities and the principles of Satyagraha, thereby critiquing the idea of Gandhi as a freeloading concept. Would it be more productive to approach the Mont Blanc advertisement as an example of the new cultural economies, bid to give concrete and tangible forms to elusive qualities as Lofgren proposes? Again, this is a question that could be open for discussion, but there is something more happening today that punctuates his long history of picturing Gandhi and his things. Similar to earlier Gandhi brand commodities, Mont Blanc stirred public protest. However, in a departure from earlier protests, Mont Blanc's defense positioned it in a unique struggle with the Indian state. Both claimed to better protect Indian heritage. On 23rd February 2010, the Swiss company tendered an unconditional apology in the Kerala High Court. Responding to a public interest litigation filed by Geo Kapan, the court supported the complaint that the Gandhi pen violated the provisions of Emblems and Names Act 1950. Another complaint filed in the Supreme Court emphasized umbrage at an ordinary thing claiming Gandhi's name. Mont Blanc was perceived simultaneously as ordinary, it is a pen, and extraordinary, it is a luxury pen. Perceptions of Gandhi too swayed from his ordinariness to his extraordinariness. The court's ruling for a corporate apology and assurance that the product would not be marketed aimed to prevent improper use of national symbols. In claiming Gandhi out of bounds, the court reminded Mont Blanc that Gandhi was the nation's brand. In turn, Mont Blanc reminded the court that it made considerable contributions to charitable causes and supported the heritage and importance of iconic historical figures. It was a responsible corporate citizen. I'll now move towards my conclusion, and I probably have exceeded by a minute, but I'll just wrap this up very quickly. And what we see before us is are pictures of a beer brand that generated some controversy, but which was quickly healed. To lead to a discussion about why Gandhi brands, I conclude with one more example of a Gandhi image that was deemed offensive and which was subsequently withdrawn. And this is the Gandhi bought a New England brewery beer. In January 2015, Advocate Janardhan Gaud filed a private petition in Cyberabad, India, against the Connecticut-based New England Brewery's new Gandhi bought pale ale beer. This is highly condemnable and punishable according to India's laws and amounts to offense under Prevention of Insults to National Honor Act 1971 and Section 124A of IPC. It is an insult to Mahatma Gandhi. This was the case against this brewery. After the lawsuit, the widespread condemnations reported in the press, the brewery apologized to those who were offended by the name. New England Brewing then started meeting with Indian American business owners, temple and community leaders, and state lawmakers, including Prasad Srinivasan, who represents Glastonbury. but why did the brewery come up with Gandhi Bot? Why did it come up with this name? The brewery had chosen the name and image Gandhi Bot out of respect for the late leader. Like many of the brewery's other beers, including Fuzzy Baby, Ducks, Imperial Stout Trooper, and Sea Hag, the name for Gandhi Bot was a product of free association. Brewers there have said the name came just after they finished making the Double India Pale Ale. They settled on the India aspect of the beer style. That led them to the country's political icon Gandhi. Then they made him into a robot. So this leaves us with sort of two ways of potentially thinking about these brands and how to respond to them. These are not the only two ways, but these could be starting points, and we could find grounds for discussion here. One has, and this is building upon Rushdie, has Gandhi become a freeloading concept? Has it become, as Rushdie noted, abstract, historical, postmodern, no longer a man in and of his time? Is Gandhi now a part of the available stock of cultural symbols, an image that can be borrowed, used, distorted, reinvented to fit many different purposes, and to the devil with historicity or truth? Again, this is Rushdie. Or can we turn to Ashish Nandi, and here I draw from him, contemporary politics, not about truths of history, as Ashish Nandi notes. Drawing on Nandi, contemporary politics is about remembered past and the problem of fashioning a future based on collective memories. For better or for worse, Gandhi seems to have entered that memory. Now, over the last couple of years, in small bits, I have been traveling in India to different image makers, visiting and talking to different image makers and curators. And I'm going to end with this comment from one of the sculptors who said that making Gandhi sculptures is his bread and butter. And this is something I also heard from various stationery sellers who say that, their business peaks during national holidays and Gandhi Jayanti when there's a big demand for Gandhi posters. So this image making continues, and there's a very long history. And there are controversies that punctuate this image making, which sort of opens the space for thinking about issues of free speech, of creativity, as well as asking why are we so drawn to Gandhi, and how and why? What does it mean for Gandhi to have become a brand? Not just today, but he's been a brand for a very long time. So with that, I'll end. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gairola Kanduri. This was really interesting. At least I have never been exposed to so many cartoons and the images that you have shown one by one to press the point. I think you've made a wonderful point here that there are two ways to look at this. That first of all, that Gandhiji's long shadow has made entry to the collective memory of our times. And it can be also seen as this trivialization of an icon that the whole country of India sort of looks up to. So this is the dilemma of this being popular, being a brand value, and yet being a person worth of every bit of respect that one person has. Let me ask you, do you want to elaborate on any of the points? We have a little bit of time here for discussion. Would you like to elaborate on any of the points that you've made already?
Well, I would thank you for those comments, and I'm glad that you found this interesting. I think I could say two things here. One is emphasize the point about mythologizing Gandhi and probably open up this question about what is history, and not to say that anything goes as history, but that it's created at very different levels through different means, whether it is posters, prints, image makers are doing that. Those who write songs, they're doing, writing history, producing history. And these are sort of passed on from one generation to another. So through looking at the image of Gandhi, we can sort of enter this debate about what is history, where does it get produced, where does it get noticed, what is it that gets archived. This is an old question, but I think it can get re-energized through Gandhi, through the examples of Gandhi. The other that I would say is that Is there, again, I would like to pose it more as a question, is that with every kind of image that is now available, particularly as a brand, and let's take the last example that I discussed, Gandhi bought, are we rehearsing the same arguments every time that, he's our brand, he's the nation's brand? And what does it mean then to stop more creative applications of Gandhi? This could be a way to enter the domain of free speech. And who has the right, who can claim Gandhi's image, and what are the ways in which we do that? Remember that during the colonial times too, Gandhi's pictures were proscribed. They were sort of, it is an act of censorship when you're punishing people for, using his pictures at your home or in your shops. So in that sense, when we are in the name of the nation also constraining the imagination of Gandhi as a brand, what kind of ethical response are we expecting from corporations or from the world of branding? As well as what does it mean to constrain, whether it is the communities, whether, it's the Indian American communities putting pressure or the government or any other entities, what does it mean to be an instrument for censoring certain imaginations? And imagination, I mean, branding a beer and using Gandhi as a robot. And are there any limitations on that kind of imagination in our world today?
Yes, thank you. I think we need to draw a line between commercialization or trivialization of a respectable figure, an icon, a national icon, and then the corporate ways of marketing. But this discussion can probably go on for a very long time, so we have to stop here and give time to our next and the last speaker for today, which is our Dr. Swagata Chatterjee. Dr. Chatterjee is an assistant professor in Vinod Gupta School of Management at IIT Kharagpur in the area of marketing and analytics. But he is also a BTech from IIT Kharagpur and a PhD in marketing from IIM Bangalore. Before coming and joining at IIT Kharagpur, he has also taught in other management institutes such as Narsi Monji, XLRI, SP Jain, MDI, etc. And he has worked with some reputed companies such as Coca-Cola, Times of India, Technosoft, Mitsubishi, Nomura, and so on various consultancy and training assignments. He describes himself as a researcher, consultant, teacher, and an academic. Let's hear what he has to say on Gandhian economics for growth in India, from Atmanirbhar Bharat to Sarvodaya. Over to you, Dr. Chatterjee.
Thank you, Chanda ma'am, for the introduction, and probably thank you to Professor Virendra Tiwari to giving me the opportunity, and the Alumni Affairs and International Relations Office also to giving me the opportunity for speaking today. I will share this my PPT first. Let me know, please, if you can see the screen.
Yes, it's visible. Just put it in the presentation mode.
Yeah, thank you everybody for giving me the opportunity. Today I'm going to discuss about Gandhian economics for inclusive growth in India, from Atmanirbhar Bharat to Sarvodaya. So to start, and I will be probably taking 15 minutes of my time for the presentation, and then next probably a few minutes for the discussion, question, answer. So the first thing that I want to say here, that Gandhi was not an economist. Gandhi was a philosopher. Gandhi was a spiritual leader, a political leader. But oftentimes, probably if you are a philosopher, you cannot be just an economist or just a sociologist or just a political leader. You have to be many things. And that's why probably whatever Gandhi told had a huge implications in the economic thought processes of various people who came and followed Gandhiji and probably came after Gandhian and probably built our nation. And that is where the topics of Gandhian economics or Gandhian thought process about economics came in. The term Gandhian economics there is no proper schools of thought in the economics books, at least what we study in management or economics subjects in universities. There is no proper I would say textbook Gandhian economics. There are probably capitalist economics where people study about profit maximization and etc. There are also socialist economics, or there are socialist schools of thoughts that comes also into the major schools of thoughts of economics. Gandhian economics, to be precise, people oftentimes mix it up with social economics or socialism or social thoughts at least, but it is a different thing altogether. And this term was given by an Indian economist called J.C. Kumarappa, who was a Gandhian, who followed Gandhiji, who was very close to Gandhi, and who was a significant part of Indian nation building after independence. So he has contributed this term. This term is actually a mixture of economics, philosophies, probably a little bit of psychology as well, spirituality as well, and that's how it gets created. And let's come to the major topic, what this thing means, how this is different from other schools of thoughts. So to understand Gandhian economics, the first thing that you have to understand is what was Gandhiji, what was the major things that Gandhiji wanted to tell. So the major things that Gandhiji wanted to tell, as Anindita ma'am was telling, that he was very simple but very deep. The basic concepts of Gandhiji was very, very easy. It was Satya, truth, Ahimsa, which is non-violence, and Aparigraha, which is non-possession. So these are the very basic three things that actually, now none of them, if you just think about these three terms, none of them are related to economics per se. It is related to human being, the soul. As again, I will again come back to what Anindita was telling, that you have to do things with your soul. That is what Gandhiji was telling. So again, all these three terms were related to soul, and they were not directly related to economics. But still, these three terms basically was driving what Gandhiji thought economic processes should be. And that's why when we talk about Gandhian economics, it's about a person, it's about a human being who has whose existence is affected by economics, whose existence is affected by his physical well-being, and whose existence is also affected by his mental well-being, or mental and spiritual well-being. So it comes morality, ethics, well-being, spirituality, economics, all of these things comes together when we try to define Gandhian economics. So that's why when I discussed what Gandhian economics is, it is not pen and paper. You cannot come down with equations like what we do in case of normal economics. You cannot come down with the equation, and where equations, the utility function of a consumer, of an individual, is only dependent on the production or the consumption. It is not like that. Our utility function means the pleasure, the happiness, the utility that I get from something is not only the functional benefit, not only the luxury benefit, but sometimes also the spiritual benefit, the moral benefit that I get from that, which generally classical theorists of economics don't consider, where probably the Gandhian economics actually is different from both socialist economists and also capitalist economics. So Gandhiji gave a small story. Actually, not Gandhiji, Dr. Kharagpur gave a small story, and he told that there are stages of economics. The first stage, the basic stage, is basically a tiger. What does a tiger do? A tiger goes for hunting, right? He goes for hunting, he kills an animal and he eats it. He does not store the animal. It does not probably contribute to the production of the animal. It does not contribute towards the restoration of the animal, or probably making sure that the animal will be there. All of these things it does not do. It just goes and eats. So this is one end of economic activity where you don't care about anybody. You care about only you. Only one single person, which is you. You are only bothered about that particular person. That is one form of economics. Sometimes many people actually say capitalist economics are like that, but probably not that. The next stage is basically a monkey. A monkey, he does the same thing. He goes and collects foods like fruits and vegetables. He collects from various trees and etc. He also does not care about whether the food will be there and etc. But at least he does not kill the tree. But that is probably his nature. He does not have the power. It is probably the nature has created him like that, or God has created him like that. That's why he does not kill. Both of these two things probably monkey is less harmful than a tiger to the nature, but both of these two people are basically predators. They collect, they don't produce. So this is more or less what capitalism is, where capitalism is probably more focused on consumption or the benefit or the maximization of profit of that particular organization. Then comes enterprises, where you do something. Probably this also comes under the umbrella of capitalism, where you do something and you then consume something. For example, I will give you an example of birds. Birds create their own nest, and after creating that nest, it claims that this is my nest. The eggs inside this nest is mine. The food inside in this nest is mine. I can go out and collect lots of food, lots of fruits, these, that, etc. And when I put that in my nest, this becomes mine. So that is what an enterprise is. You have to work and then you get some benefit out of it. So probably this form of capitalism where I'm talking about the tiger and the monkey is probably the British rule. What British ruled us and they didn't care about us. While this kind of enterprise where you are a bird is probably the current industry where it cared about us, obviously. It cared about the nature because that nature is giving him the food, the materials for the building of this particular nest, but still that nest is his own. The difference between this bird and the bees are that bees also create their own hive. Bees also live in that hive, and a particular hive is only for those bees who are part of that hive. But they collect the honey, the nectar, and convert it in honey and put that in a common source of food inside the hive. So that common source is actually owned by everybody. This is what socialism is. Probably socialism, the people who have social thoughts probably want this kind of a environment. But everybody will work and everybody will consume. But the difference, the very basic difference between this and what Gandhi told, or Gandhiji tried to probably preach, is that this is also where this particular bee has an expectation that once I give something, there's an expectation that I will get something back. And this probably encouraged lots of free riders where people will not work. And that is probably a major thing that people say against socialist thought processes, that there will be lots of free riders who will not work but still enjoy. What Gandhiji told is try to be like a mother. A mother, when he creates food or he creates something for his kid, he does not expect that 40 years down the line, 50 years down the line, this kid will grow up and see me when I get old. She does not think about that. She gives that selflessly. I mean, the members telling the selflessness, the sacrifices. So a mother sacrifices her life for the betterment of the family, for the kid, for the overall well-being of the family without any expectation of getting back. Now, these will not come from normal economic thought process. It will not come from an exchange-oriented thought process. It will only come from a spiritual thought process, which probably nature gives inside the mother through hormones and etc. It gives inside the mother when a child is born, and that's why they become that kind of a human being. And probably that is something that Gandhiji was trying to tell us, that you also do, you also produce, you also work, but not in exchange of something, not to expect something back from thing, but to get a spiritual utility. If everybody works for the spiritual utility, obviously there will be people who will be taking care of you also. That reciprocation will also make sure that you will be also good. Now, this is something many people might say that this is an utopian thing. This is not something that can be done exactly. And I will try to say that how it can be probably implemented, if not in a large scale, if not probably when we are competing with other bigger societies or economies which are capitalist. How in that kind of environment I can do that? Probably we will not be able to do that. But still, some of the things we can take from there, and I will come to that. So that is probably the satya part. So you have to be truthful whatever you are doing. The next part is the major two part which are related actually, which is non-violence and aparigraha, which is not owning anything, non-possession. So Gandhiji told that we have to practice. So because it is a spiritual thing, it should start from the consumer. Any economic studies starts from the consumer demand function. So what consumer wants, what is his utility function, what from where he gets value. So similarly here also we have to think from the consumer. So if we, the human beings, the individuals, try to get value or try to get utility from stuff which are abundant, which are not a few, where the supply is not limited, then probably violence will not occur. Violence occurs when? Why does some particular country attacks another country? Often see, if you do a strategic analysis, you will see that probably there is a petrol. Now, petrol and this kind of I will say minerals are probably less available, and that's why if you probably attack that country and take a possession of that particular country, you're taking possession of the petrol also, which will give betterment to your people to have a capitalized lifestyle, which is not something that Gandhiji preached. Gandhiji told that why don't we try to make that kind of a lifestyle, but we will depend less on stuff that are limited and focus more on stuff that are abundant. For example, sun, for example, wind. Probably if you are focusing on electricity generation rather than focusing on fossil fuel-based electricity generation, this probably is an extension of whatever Gandhi told, that why don't you majorly focus on the wind energy and solar energy. So that is probably part of Gandhian thought process. Gandhi also was against industrialization. Many people say that. He was not. He was majorly focused on centralized industrialization, where a group of people will focus on industry. And also he was saying that do that industry which is needed. Don't probably focus on those kind of industry which contributes towards your materialistic lifestyle. Only focus on or majorly focus on those industries which focuses on your very existence. I will give you a small example what Gandhian economics people say. For example, many people say that they are against electricity. Now, how he asks people that how does electricity help? When does electricity help? When electricity allows somebody who is sitting in a rural area to study from his home in this COVID situation, then probably electricity is helping that person. But let's say, I will take another 2 minutes.
Just reminding you about, yes.
Yeah, thank you. 2 minutes. So on the other hand, there is an example called Arcot village, which is west out of Tamil Nadu, where when rainfall happens, 95% of rain goes to the sea and 5% only stores. Now, when electricity comes to that particular place, only few people who owns lots of lands gets the access of the electricity, and they pulls out water from there, do farming, agriculture, creates fresh fruits and vegetables, and sells that in Bangalore. Basically, the people in Bangalore who has ample amount of water and electricity getting access to the water of electricity of the Arcot village also, and not the people of that particular place. So this is the last slide where how we can apply the Gandhi's economic thought process. The first thing we have to think about is we have to change the consumers. Forget about where I will produce, where I will do this, whether I will go for industrialization or non-industrialization, whether I will support branding or non-branding. The first thing that we have to do is to change the normal human being. So we have to focus on their spiritual upliftment. We have to make them anti-materialistic. So probably from the government, that kind of thought processes should be preached, that anti-materialistic, more green, organic, more local or rural, more village-oriented consumption. If you want to pay money, if you have money, and if you want to spend money on these things, not spend money on something which has been imported from somewhere and which contributes towards your materialistic lifestyle. That is the first thing. And obviously centralized key industry and decentralized production. And the third, probably the most important thing is that people will say that then if you follow this, GDP will go down. GDP is not the important thing. The important thing is the inclusive growth, everybody's growth. The GDP is very high, but the per capita GDP is very low, or some people are very lots of huge amount of inequality. That is not something that probably is a expected outcome of a social economic environment. So by saying that, I will stop and I'm open for questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chatterjee, for giving us an idea, a brief outline of an alternative kind of economics that you're calling, or scholars have called Gandhian economics. I wish we had more time to talk about this, because there was this important economic idea also about trusteeship, how to have wealth without trying to get possession of it. But we do not really have time any left. So a very quick question to you, this alternative economics based on Gandhian thoughts seem very closer to the sustainable development idea, to welfare economics, and to many of the minimalistic economist ideas. Do you think the inspiration of Gandhiji has worked on them, or this was the natural offshoot? Very briefly, just make a comment.
No, if I say very briefly, the answer is affirmative. So if I have to say very briefly, the answer is affirmative. Yes, probably. See, Gandhiji's thought, I'm not sure whether every minimalist person or every pro-environment person has read Gandhiji or not, or have listened to his thought processes or not. But probably these are correlated. These are in sync with each other. And Gandhiji is also a minimalist. Gandhiji is also a pro-environment, pro-local. And I think that is something which will stop a lots of problems that we are having today. So I would agree to whatever you're saying.
Thank you. Sorry, this discussion, as you understand, would have gone on. And I would now hand over the session to our Deputy Director, Professor Sriman Bhattacharya, to say a few words about this session.
Thank you, Mr. Chakraborty. I must thank all the speakers for spending their time with us on this e-Symposium. In fact, it's very interesting. I was listening to them very patiently. Well, Sagoto happens to be my student, and I'm very happy to see him over here. Well, as it has been talked about, the legacy, the equality, what Gandhiji had envisioned, and of course about the branding, and subsequently about the Gandhian economic. I think what's happening today possibly is very much in line with what Gandhiji had predicted. He had put forward maybe 4 goals before the youth for humanity. And this, I think we all are talking all the time about. It's about Swaraj, about the ahimsa, the non-violence, about Swadeshi and Sarvodaya, the universal liberty. And possibly Gandhiji had championing of his Swadeshi, possibly the Atmanirbharata, which was centered on the principles of economic self-reliance, self-sufficiency. And he had envisaged the villages as the center for the self-sufficiency. And in fact, this is what I was thinking. IIT Kharagpur as an institute of technological importance. We are in fact trying to empower the rural masses through sustainable innovative programs, the Rural Development Center. And when we talk about this Swadeshi, the Atmanirbharata, and on this IIT Kharagpur has to play a very vital role to empower people to see that how the technology can infiltrate in different parts of different aspects of the activities, so that truly we become self-reliant, truly we become Atmanirbhar, which I think is very much in line with the Gandhian philosophy. And other day, in fact, we were discussing that how relevant the Gandhian thoughts and philosophies are as of today. And in fact, I believe that the philosophies what on which Gandhiji used to talk about, I think they are very much relevant as of today. And I think we need to work in that particular direction, in that line, so that the country truly becomes knowledgeable and with things and rule the world. And that's possibly what is our aim and objective, both at the institute level and at the national level. Well, I thank very much our director, Professor Tiwari, for reading, in fact, this particular e-Symposium, which is happening over, this is the third in the series. And my colleagues from the Dean, Associate Deans of International and Endowment Office, and of course the whole technical team of our institute who has facilitated this program to happen in this pandemic situation through this online mode. And in fact, being in my residence, I really do not feel that I'm away from you all. We are as if we are discussing in the same room, the common place. I thank you all for being with us and giving us an opportunity to get these ideas, discuss about these ideas, think about these ideas to take the country forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. With this, we come to the close of today's session. We have two more sessions planned this month, one on the 27th of August and the last one on the 28th of August. And you can find the announcements and the flyers on social media and our institute website. As our Deputy Director said, we thank the speakers and the moderator, the institute administration, Mr. Shiv Shankar Das and his team from the Center of Educational Technology, the Institute Branding and Communications team, the Office of International Relations and the Office of Alumni Affairs, and particularly our Associate Dean of International Relations, Professor Anandru here, without whom today's event would not be arranged. And so thank you everyone and good night.